Okay, we're in the middle of chapter of letter 17. It's at the period. The first words are kach tzedakah, so too tzedakah is the revelation. So I hope everyone can find it. Just to take a quick moment, one of the primary themes of this letter is about the power that is entrusted to us to motivate Hashem to be beneficent and benevolent in his forthcoming, and that Hashem essentially responds to us as we act towards Hashem. When we are generous and forthright, Hashem is generous and forthright. We actually had a nice little analogous illustration of this in the Parsha, where it talks about the responsibility of the Kohen to always be presentable, as we say. In fact, later on, not to get too far down the field here, but later on in Torah, we have a very sad story where Aaron's two sons die, and Aaron is told that he should not conduct himself in any of the ways of mourning. He should cut his hair and wear clean clothes and so on. And amongst the very many explanations, one is exactly this point, that the way that we present ourselves is the way that Hashem presents himself to us. There is this corollary. We are also working off of a specific analysis of a pasuk that says that your mitzvahs are excessively abundant, or rachva ma'od. It's a pasuk in Tilim, in chapter 119. The full pasuk reads, "For all finite beings I see the end, but your mitzvahs are excessively broad." And the word there that's translated as mitzvahs more specifically means mitzvah, the singular, specific mitzvah. So what is that single specific mitzvah that is rachva mi'oid, that is extraordinarily expansive? Tzedakah. We'll get there later on. You kind of see where this is headed. This too ties in with a broad whole thematic understanding that is a very strong, I don't want to call it dividing point because it's not like, but difference of shita, of conceptual philosophical position between Hasidus and other interpretations. And it goes back to a dispute between Rambam and Ramban as to what is the ultimate goal. Is the ultimate goal what we commonly refer to as Gan Eden, namely souls without bodies, or is the ultimate goal Tchias HaMesim, the coming to life of the dead, souls within bodies? Another way of phrasing this is our perspective that this world is basically a warm-up. It's kind of even a nuisance until we get to the real thing. And the real thing is just souls without bodies, have to be annoyed by all of this physical stuff. But wow, we are doing all this physical stuff, so we better do it in a holy way. So we have to eat, so eat kosher. So we have to sleep, so sleep, I don't know, in a godly way and say Shema. And we have to conduct ourselves in monetary things, so be honest and so on. But really, we'd rather just not have to deal with all of that. Or do we say that the ultimate goal is the seamless harmony between the physical and the spiritual? So Hashem created us that we need to eat so that we will be able to fulfill the mitzvah of kashrus and matzah. Hashem created us that we need to live in homes so that we'll be able to put up mezuzahs. So again, these are the two different philosophies as to what is the end-to-end game, what is the ultimate, which is not only about the end game, but it informs us every step along the way. Everything we are doing is pointed towards this goal. So again, if we simply see the Gashmis as some sort of bother, then we'd sort of wish we didn't have to deal with it. But if we see it as some sort of distinctive capacity that is superior in our ability to be connected with Hashem, not just tolerable, but it can empower us to be absolutely connected with the infinity of Hashem. If we're able to see it that way, we are able to understand the greater impact of mitzvahs than of being detached from the physical. And again, these are concepts that are so embedded in the teachings of Hasidus, they probably just seem incredibly obvious. And yet, this is a very distinctive philosophical idea. if we had our druthers, whatever druthers are, we would want to be souls and bodies. Whereas we might take the position saying, well, we don't want to be souls and bodies. Other people like us to be souls and bodies. But really, this is just one big practice round for the real thing, which is the soul without the body. So this is sort of the path that we're headed down. Okay, so here we go. Kach, so too. Hatzedakah, he bechinas giloi v'ha'ores orein soif baruch hu, soivev kol almin. Tzedakah evokes from Hashem a revelation of the infinite light of Hashem from the characteristic of soivev kol almin. Now, these are terms that we are familiar with. Just to take a moment, two of the ways in which we try to put some terminology on Hashem's relationship with us is this word soivev, which literally means to surround, or it's also the word for like the culture or the atmosphere, the sviva, which is the sort of tone or the feel and so on. And its partner, which is memale kol almin, which is something very specific. The very specifics of memale are the way in which Hashem relates very specifically to individuals and individual circumstances. So the sviva it's like kind of like the difference. I mean, in a silly way, the child says, my uncle buys me candy. What do you ever do for me? The things that the parent does for the child are much less visible than what the uncle does. The uncle comes over and he plays ball with them and he buys him toys and he gives him candy. And the parent, what does he do? He just, has a house and food and life and so on. So the soivev are a lot of the things that we, quote, take for granted. And the mamale, because they're not visible, they're not tangible, they're not describable. But in that sense, they're far more not only beneficial, but they're far more intensely connected. It's like attitude and character and culture, a lot of these ideas. Okay. So what does this mean? Sheyev yiskal adolam haza. So can we tangibilize that? Can we bring it down and manifest it into that idea? It's like all of these old stories about the person who eats cholent and then he tries to recreate it on a Wednesday and it just doesn't taste the same because there's something intangible about the characteristic of Shabbos that cannot be bottled. But imagine if we could bring that down. Now, commonly we can't. Again, it's a classic thing. We see this in businesses where they say, "Oh, how come everybody loves to work for Starbucks and no one likes to work for Kmart?" Oh, well, let's go and do that. Let's go and emulate that. Let's go and copy that. It's something far more profound and less tangible. It is the sviva. It is this surrounding idea. It is this cultural characteristic that makes one place joyous and pleasant and happy and so on, but you can't tangibilize it. So in this context, this is the distinctive gift that tzedakah can, in fact, achieve. It can bring down that which is ordinarily untouchable and implement it into the particulars and the specifics. A little bit of an example from yesterday's parsha. We have the story where Moshe Rabbeinu's name is omitted from the parsha, and it's the first parsha since Moshe is introduced in the beginning of the book until the whole book of Devarim, which is all Moshe's monologue to the people, when Moshe's name is not mentioned, which of course begs the question why. And the common answer which is given is that in this week's parsha, Moshe makes that famous statement to Hashem that if you don't forgive the Jewish people, erase my name from your book. And Hashem says, okay, you win, but since you said it, I'm going to erase your name from one parsha, and that's this week's parsha. So the Rebbe asks the question, what does this really mean? Hashem is threatening to destroy the Jewish people, and what is Moshe Rabbeinu's concern? Oh, well, I don't want to be in that book. And what does that even mean? Because I'm going to erase my name from my book, he's just sort of twisting Hashem's arm. There's got to be some greater depth here that we may otherwise be overlooking. And so the Rebbe explains that what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying to Hashem is, you, Hashem, so to speak, Moshe is sort of teaching Hashem, whatever this means, you are presuming that your relationship with Hashem, with the people, is predicated on their observance of mitzvahs. And this is such an egregious violation of the mitzvahs, the worshiping of the golden calf, that it reasonably completely destroys the relationship you have with the Jewish people. So if you go to a bank and they can't add, well, that destroys the whole purpose of the bank. If you take your clothing to the seamstress and they cut it instead of sew it, it destroys the whole relationship. So Moshe says, take my name out of the book. It's not about my name. A name is something that's particular to me. It's individual to me. Because when our name is taken away, then we're left only with our very essence. Because the only purpose of our name is really for other people. I don't need a name for myself any more than I need a phone number, unless there are people who want to call me. So my name, again, like my phone number, is a method through which others can be connected to me. But it's not me in my very essence. So when Moshe says to Hashem, erase my name from your book, he's not just saying, well, just make sure nobody thinks that I did this, which is that really what Moshe Rabbeinu was so worried about when Hashem is, God forbid, threatening to destroy every single Jew? He's just worried about his legacy. I mean, it sounds kind of not very Moshe Rabbeinu-like. And so this is the meaning, that when you take my name away, you get down to the essence. And this is the opportunity that we have in mitzvah fulfillment. And this is the counterintuitive sort of, revolutionary point, whatever the word is, that through mitzvah fulfillment, we actually effectuate the implementation of the infinite of Hashem more than when we sort of detach ourselves from the physical world and elevate ourselves outside of this physical world. Okay. When we initiate this through the Sarusa de Lasata. Sarusa de Lasata, it's Aramaic. It means that the initiation begins from us. When we initiate this connection with Hashem at such an essential level, Hashem responds in this uniquely impactive character trait. This is what we do with Torah in the Torah way of tzedakah and chesed chinam. Now, chesed chinam translates as gratuitous kindness. It sounds a little condescending, gratuitous, like doesn't sound, meaning it's limitless kindness. It's not a kindness that's a response to some request or some recompense for some action of kindness. It is completely unbounded. And that's what the tzedakah is. Again, another example that we're familiar with, Avraham Avinu interrupts God's revelation to him to go and welcome the guests. And remember, he initially thought that these guests not only were not God-fearing, but that they worship the dirt on their feet. You recall that he insists that they wash their feet before they can come into his tent, because he presumes, or at least is concerned or fears, that they worship the dirt on their feet. So he's interrupting the divine revelation. So we learn from here that it's greater to have guests than it is to welcome the divine, etc. But what this ultimately teaches us, sort of at the next level, is that the connection with the infinite is greater through welcoming guests and having the divine revelation. So it's not that Abraham, it's not about his personal benefit that he was getting God's attention and now he's going to put that aside to help other people. It's that the impact of godliness on the world is superior through this act of kindness than via the expression of godliness to Abraham. Not just that he was willing to give it up to help somebody else, I mean, which itself is a value, it's a beautiful thing, but it's something far more profound than that. It's that Abraham experienced, the world experienced, let's put it that way, it's not Abraham personally. The world was more impacted or more profoundly impacted with the infinity of Hashem through the act of kindness than via I want to minimize it, I was going to say the simple or the expression of godliness, the revelation of godliness that Abraham was experiencing. And this is described la'aseh b'tchiyas hamesim. And when will this be the most profound? In the time of the coming to dead of the life, the coming to life of the dead. B'yeser seis v'yeser uz, with greater strength and greater enthusiasm. Le'ein ketz, incomparably greater mibechinas gilei ha'ara or ha'ara beganed natachtem ve'el, incomparably superior to the revelation of godliness in Gan Eden. I'm going to come back to all of these words, but this is really like the bumper sticker of the whole line. The lower Gan Eden and the higher Gan Eden. Now, let's back up a second, just for a moment. The following is in parentheses. It's not directly relevant to this letter, but it's just a little story, and it has to do with the phrase at which we just read here. In the 1980s, they started to broadcast the Rebbe's Farbrengens on cable TV. I mean, today it seems like so look what we're doing here for free, and it was incredibly expensive. And they brought these satellites, and it was the coolest thing. So Rabbi Manis Friedman was tasked with doing a simultaneous translation of the Farbrengen. And it was a really enormous job, as you can imagine. I mean, you got to listen and speak and so on. He tells the story that when he got this task, he went to the library. Remember, this is like, I know it feels like ancient history. You go to the library, and he took out a book about translation for the UN interpreters. So the first rule of UN interpreters is if the speaker is going too fast, you push a button and a little red light goes on to tell the guy to slow down. So I said, okay, well, that's meaningless. That's not going to happen. And then they used to ask, I mean, UN interpreters, they ask for the notes in advance, this and that. This is not going to help. Anyway, so then he starts doing it, and it's a challenge and so forth. And the Rebbe was very much in favor of this whole thing and so on. He finds out from Rabbi Krinsky, this is a long story, I'm sorry, but it illustrates a very minor point here, that the Rebbe asked for a video of the Farbrengen. So he's like so worried, and he starts to realize the enormity of what he's doing here. He's representing, because somebody tunes in, they don't know what the Rebbe is saying. They only know what he's saying the Rebbe is saying. What if he said it wrong, and so on. So Rabbi Krinsky says, no, you don't understand. The Rebbe is trying to see, how can he make it easier for you? So this phrase that we just read here, yeser seis v'yeser uz, is a phrase that the Rebbe uses pretty commonly to do it with greater strength and greater impact. That's how Rabbi Friedman used to translate that phrase. So at the next Farbrengen, the Rebbe said this phrase, yeser seis v'yeser uz, which we just read here, and the Rebbe translated it, and then the Rebbe said it in English with more strength and more enthusiasm. So he learned that that's how the Rebbe wants to translate it, more enthusiasm. Okay, that's now the parentheses closed. Now we're back into the context of the story here. So the Alter Rebbe says that where is the most profound illustration of the full-on impact of Hashem? That was my dramatic pause as you get the answer to all of life. It is in Tchiyas HaMesim, the coming to life of the dead, more than in Gan Eden. So let's back up here. Let's talk about a couple of stages along the way. Sadly, when a person passes, so their soul departs from their body. So as we know, the soul and the body come into this world. They don't really get along with each other. That's why, as Pirkei Avos says, we are born against our will, because the soul says, I don't want to go down there. There's people and they talk nonsense and they want to eat and there's traffic and they don't want to do holy, godly things. And God says, too bad. Promise me you'll be righteous and not wicked. Hits him in the back of the head. Go down there and make us proud. He comes into the body. And the body says, what are you doing here? I just want to eat and sleep and so on and stop with you and your holiness and so on. And that yet somehow they come to realize that they are in fact a perfect pair and they are a perfect match for one another. And they have their struggles, and sometimes the body insists on doing body things and sometimes the soul insists on doing soul things. But eventually, hopefully, at least a little spurts, they realize that, you know what, without the body, souls can't do mitzvahs, and without the soul, the body has no purpose and no mission, etc. When the time comes, sadly, after 120, and the body and soul have to depart, so as Pirkei Avos says, against your will does a person pass. Why does he want to die? What do you mean? All you did is complain. Did you don't want to go down to this physical world? Yeah, but now I realize that only in this physical world can I do mitzvahs. But you're going to get a reward. But the reward is just a glimmer of godliness. It's not the engagement in it. It's a little bit of a problem that our general public society has. Everybody's so seeking the reward, that meanwhile they're just miserable in their every moment. So then after this reward, they're going to have Tchias HaMesim. There's going to be a time when they're reunited. But why would they want to be reunited? Isn't it better up in heaven? And the answer is no. This is illustrated by a concept we're all familiar with, the Ushpizin. You recall that every year on Sukkot, we talk about the Ushpizin, the historical Ushpizin, the Chassidish Ushpizin. We ask the question, why do the Ushpizin want to come down? Imagine Moshe Rabbeinu, Avraham Avinu, they're in the loftiest levels, the most intense levels of godliness. Why do they want to come to my sukkah? Sometimes it's cold and raining, and I know the food's good, but come on, is it really that much better than being up in Shemayim, the closest level with Hashem, absolutely aligned with the infinity of godliness? And the answer is yes. And that's also added to why do they come on Sukkot? Why don't they come on Shavuos? Why don't they come on Pesach? And part of the answer is because Sukkot is the most gashmius of all of the holidays. Because what do? You sit in the sukkah. Yes, it's good to study Torah in the sukkah, and we shake lulav in the sukkah, and so on. But the halacha is to simply sit in the sukkah and eat, and that's when the Ushpizin come, because the absolute intense, most intense, is that a word? Intensest expression of godliness is specifically here in this physical world while we are engaged in mitzvah actions. And that's the gift that we experience with Tchias HaMesim. That's why the souls want to come back down. Remember, it didn't want to come down initially. Okay, once it's here, it doesn't want to leave. But now that it's up in heaven, who's retired, who wants to unretire? Well, that's what happens. We do want to unretire because we don't want to be purposeless without meaning and significance and so on. And this is where, in this physical world, is where the soul experiences the full-on impact of the infinity of Hashem to such a degree that it prefers to leave Olam Haba and come back into this physical world. Sharei kol neshamas hatzadikim v'atanoim v'haneviyim, all the neshamas of the tzadikim and the tanoim. Tanoim is a term for authors of the Mishnah and the prophets. So here, why does the Alter Rebbe pick these three descriptions? We could say the Avos, we could say the Amoraim, the people who wrote the Gemara. I mean, when the Alter Rebbe gives numerous examples, he's trying to point out something distinctive about each of these categories that adds a little nuance or flavor to the idea. So the ultimate objective here is the Alter Rebbe's desire to describe that this physical world, when engaged in godliness, is a more profound impact and intensity of alignment with Hashem than all of the world to come. So the Alter Rebbe points out that this is true of the person who was the tzaddik. The tzaddik, of course, represents that he no longer has a nefesh habahamis. So you might think, why is this world more profound? Because in this world you overcome difficulty, spiritual difficulty, challenge, temptation. But the tzaddik doesn't have that. He's already eradicated his temptation. So you might think, well, for him, it doesn't matter. He's already past that. So we say, no, even for the tzaddik. Then we have the Tanoim. The Tanoim are the people who are of the most intellectual understanding of godliness. So you might think, why is it pleasant for the neshama to be down here in this physical world? Is because then it can start to pursue Hashem intellectually. But the Tanoim, the authors of the Mishnah, which is not just about specifically of the Mishnah, but sort of the authors of oral Torah, the people who have the greatest understanding of godliness, they also would prefer to be here in this physical world. And the prophets, you say, well, they're prophets. They are completely uplifted outside of this physical world. Don't they want to live in a purely spiritual circumstance? They don't even have the boundaries of time because they can see via the blessing of godliness into the future that they too want to be part of this physical world. Right now, historically, they are all in Gan Eden Ha'elyon, in the highest level. Baraim Hamaylis, the highest, uppest, toppest, mostest. They too will yislapshu begufaysehem la'asid. They too want to come back down into this physical world. The Yakumu went to rise up as man hatchia at the time of Tchias Hames. They want to. You think, well, why does Moshe Rabbeinu want to come back down here? Somebody's hand is raised. No. Why would Moshe Rabbeinu want to come back down here? What isn't he at the loftiest, highest level of godliness? Why would Avram Avinu? Why would Shmuel Hanavi? Why would they want to come back down here? When they're here, aren't they trying to get outside of here by becoming tzaddikim and tanoim and neviim? Somebody's hand is raised. Did you want to ask the question?
Yes. Sorry, I had a little technical problem. This is Beth. Thank you, Rabbi, for your teaching. So I want to just make sure I'm getting the concept that the souls, and now we're talking about the souls of like Moshe and the Tanaim, the Tanaim, the more educated, more intellectual and loftier souls, would still rather be
yes
down here in our lower world because
yes.
There's more revelation and there's more.
Correct. Absolutely. What you're saying is absolutely correct. There is a greater impact of relationship with Hashem when we perform a physical, specific mitzvah, even greater than Moshe Rabbeinu in the highest heights and the tzaddikim, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank
Correct.
you.
Okay. The fee sha'arav ha'kiddush b'Gan Eden he bechinas mamalik olam. What's going on in Gan Eden is particular. It's what we call mamale kol almid, the very specifics of it, and it's thus limited to it. And we want more than just the limitation. We want the full-on experience, and this is that common theme. And again, it's so embedded in the teachings of Hasidus that it probably feels like, well, of course, everybody knows that. And again, we know it because of letters like this, because there is a whole school of thought in the world of Torah that says that this world is basically one big nuisance that we'd be better off without. But okay, while we're here already, we might as well do some good. But really, we're really waiting for it to be good somewhere else. We're really waiting for it to be somewhere else. So here the Alter Rebbe explains a little bit of the sort of conceptual idea behind it. Shehu, why is Gan Eden? Even the loftiest levels of Gan Eden, even the Gan Eden which Moshe Rabbeinu, David HaMelech, Shmuel Hanavi, pick the tzaddik, the Tana, or the prophet of your choice, would rather be in a physical body down here than to be in that most intense, lofty level, because it is still a level of tzimtzum. Olam haba, the world to come. And remember, the root of the word olam is the word concealed, hidden. This world, the world that is yet to be, or the world that in that state, is still a world. And to back this up, we quote a Gemara. That happens to be Gemara Menachos 29b. Kamayim Razal, B'Yud Nivra Olam Haba. The Gemara says, with the letter Yud, remember Hashem's name. We talked about this a lot in the letters about Tshuva. One way to visualize it is to see Hashem's name vertically as opposed to horizontally. The Yud, which is the first letter of Hashem's name, is the creation point of the world to come. So compared to the physical of this world, certainly the spiritual intensity of the world to come is far greater. So here we live in a world where we see the material and we have to strain to find the spiritual. And in the world to come, at the loftiest level, it's like the Yud compared to us, we being remember this term, the lower or second letter Hey. So in the world of Kedusha, where smaller is closer to zero, and zero is better. I know it sounds like some sort of wordplay, but remember, Hashem is not a thing. He's no thing. So every thing is distant from Hashem. So the less of a thing something is, just like it is at the personality, the less arrogant I am, the less self-aware I am, the more I become aligned with the infinity of Hashem. And the more self-aware I am, and the more I insist on my own identity, the more distant I become from Hashem. In contrast here, the Yud, which is the smallest letter, so it seems to be so teeny, it's as close to Hashem as you can get, except for Hashem himself. And what is Hashem himself? That is in the mitzvah action. It's like the difference between a dear friend and family. A dear friend is a dear friend, and they come to your house and they take, food out of the refrigerator, and they don't even have to ask, and everybody understands, but they're still not family. There's still this intense level of godliness that is manifest through a mitzvah that is closer to the no thing, the non-thing of the full-on intensity of Hashem, more intensely, more profoundly than the Yud of Olam Haba. And that's why even Moshe Rabbeinu, even Shmuel the prophet, et cetera, is prefers to leave that Olam Haba and put on a physical body, even though that body's, I'm tired, I'm hungry, because when that physical body does a mitzvah, the intense connection with Hashem is incomparable to the spiritual experience that it has up in Shemayim. So here he explains it in a little more depth. This is called the higher level of Chachma. Now, when we say a higher level of Chachma, we don't mean like this person is smarter than that person. It's not just more. It means the perspective of Hashem. And remember, Chachma, although we translate it as wisdom, doesn't mean how many pages of the Talmud I know by heart. It means the capacity to imagine outside of myself, the willingness to go completely outside of my identity. The anagram of koach ma, the willingness to say what, to genuinely be amazed by the infinity of Hashem. And the Yud begins that level. But again, that Yud leads to the Hey, that leads to the Vav, that leads to the Hey. So it's already in the process of becoming more and more materialized. And Hashem is ultimately, again, not a thing. And so where do we get that true one nothingness, the true transparency of godliness? It is specifically in the physical mitzvah actions of this world. So the level of Chacham Ilah Nikras Eden is called Eden. Eden, even if we translate it, when we translate it as being the most joyous, the most meaningful, but it's still Hashem and me. There's still a separation. And again, it starts to trickle down. It is the starting point of all worlds. Like it is said, all the worlds are created through this process of Chachma. So the Chachma is the beginning of an idea that then develops into the prototype that's then expressed, that's then manufactured, that's then sold in Walmart, et cetera, but it's still linked to a particular item. Look, even Mount Everest ends at some point. Even the most dynamic, most fantastic, it expires. And the definition of Hashem is you can't define him. I know that sounds like silly talk, but that's this idea. The relationship with Hashem that is born of Chachma, that is born of creation, even of the tzaddikim, of Gan Eden, is still limited. It's still God and the world. There's still a detachment. Again, we hear this. Unfortunately, it's probably originates in the non-Jewish origin, but it trickles into our vernacular where we talk about, why would God want this? Or what does God think about this? And the premise, the flaw of that premise is there's God and the world, and God is like watching the world. And that's essentially what Bilam said. God's watching, but maybe you'll catch him napping. Because it suggests that God is separate from the world rather than that God is the world. And the world is subsumed within the infinity of Hashem. It doesn't have its own identity. Because again, we have a tendency, not us, we're perfect, but we project things based on ourselves. So since the most basic element of existence is the rule of physics that two items can't occupy the same space, so there's me and the computer. There's me and my friend. We're best friends. We're deepest friends. We share everything. He's still me and him, like we talked about with the two people and the jug of water. But Hashem is not something in addition to us. We are one with Hashem. Hashem is one with us. It's very hard to see it. It's very hard to imagine it. Where can it be experienced, whether we recognize it or not? In the fulfillment of a physical mitzvah. When we are the conduit for the expression of the infinity of Hashem, we express this full-on intensity. Whereas in Gan Eden, it's still me observing Hashem, something from Hashem, the most intense, the greatest understanding. But I'm not one with it. And again, I don't understand the art and so on, but it's still me amazed, captivated by the art. But then I leave. I am not the art. Maybe in music, a person becomes one with the music. Again, it's not something that I'm personally familiar with, but it's almost impossible. Maybe it is absolutely impossible to come up with a perfect analogy for this in the world of the physical. Because again, in the world of the physical, everything has its own identity. And in our relationship with Hashem, we're not separated out. So we continue. ובגן עדן היא בכינס גילוי השגה לכל חדה from שיר דילי כנגדה. שאין כאן השמש בגן עדן הוא משגה סרס התרא שיש בעולם הזה בנגלה. כדיס בזעיר HaKodesh פרשת שלח וגמרא בעובדא דרבא בר נחמני, which we'll read that story in a moment. So we have a rule of thumb that when the soul leaves the body after 120, so now the soul is reunited with Hashem. So, what's the difference between heaven and hell? Well, it's how much you want to be there. Two people have the same experience. One person finds it incredibly heavenly. The other person finds it incredibly hellish, because one person has read the book and gone to the lecture and found it interesting. The other person hasn't developed any interest in it. So based on the soul's experience in the body is the measure of its capacity to appreciate the infinity that Hashem is expressing to him. When the soul is aligned with the godly through its experience in this physical world, then when it comes there, it gets it, it understands it, it appreciates it. But if he doesn't train himself to understand what's going on, he's got to go to summer school. And we've got to relearn how to appreciate that godliness. But the common theme for even the greatest tzaddik and even the most negligent of people is it's God and me. And there's still a separation. And that separation is always going to produce some degree of limit. Of course, for Moshe Rabbeinu, the limit is mild, and for the wicked person, the limit is intense. And yet, sitting in the sukkah is the full-on intensity of Hashem. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu says, there's a bus leaving for this world, I'm on it. But that means you're going to have to take on physical characteristics. Sign me up. Because those physical characteristics are what surrender me to the infinity of Hashem. And again, it's very hard to give an English example. Here, the Alter Rebbe makes a reference to a story of Rabba bar Nachmani. This is the story. The Gemara in Bava Metzia 86a, if you're keeping score at home, there was a heavenly debate concerning a case of uncertainty in the laws of tsaras. That is when a person has a discoloration on their skin and they don't know if it's something medical or if it's something spiritual. And the debate was, what came first? Was it the spot on or the hair that grew in the spot? And as you recall in the Parshas in Sefer Vayikra, there is a lengthy discussion in Parshas Tazria and Matzorah all about the intricacies of these laws. So God weighed in. God said the individual is pure. That's what God said. But all the members of the academy, the heavenly academy, said he's impure. So we have a dispute between God and the heavenly academy, So they said, who can arbitrate this? So they said, let's go to Rabba bar Nachmani. Now, Rabba bar Nachmani is living in this physical world. They're up in heaven. God and the heavenly academy can't agree, and they decide who's going to determine the answer to this. It's going to be Rabba bar Nachmani, who lives in Bavel. And as the Gemara says, they agreed, that is God and the Heavenly Academy, that Rabbi Bar Nachmani should arbitrate because he was the expert in these halachas and so on. So what we see is that the Hashem and the Heavenly Academy, Moshe, all the superstars, said, we don't know, let's go ask a human being. Now, just a little between us chickens. One thing that really fries the world's latkes is that you Lubavitchers, you genuinely believe that Mashiach will come today and Moshe Rabbeinu will come back and Rashi and the Rambam. And what are they all going to do? What does every Lubavitcher say? Oh, they're all going to come to the Rebbe to ask him to teach them Torah. Makes people nuts when you say that. They go crazy when you say it. But it's this Gemara. This is exactly the point. Okay, but plus we say, it's a nice way to get their goat, but make people nuts. They go crazy when you say it, yelling and carrying on. Okay. So this competition or comparison between the heavenly and the earthly service is for Torah study. That is because there's no concept of mitzvahs in Gan Eden, right? They're not putting on tefillin and lighting Shabbos candles, eating latkes in Gan Eden. Because human action is not naturally going to be a keli for Kedusha. You got to force yourself, right? People are not going to do mitzvahs intuitively. They need to have this instruction. So it's specifically in the time of Tchias HaMesim, when the neshamas are going to be back into their bodies, and they'll be able to do mitzvahs and have this opportunity to, again, experience this type of godliness in a way that they're missing in Gan Eden. So here we go. What they will receive during Tchias HaMesim, and it'll be Seviv Kol, be completely subsumed within the infinity of Hashem. It's like, again, the difference between friends and family. It's not something measured and expressed, and it's big, bigger, biggest. It is absolutely aligned. It's the sense of being an absolutely knowing who you are, knowing where you're supposed to be, and so on. And that type of absolute, I've used again, it's very difficult to give an analogy, but hopefully we experience this. I use the example, it's like Yom Kippur. A person goes on vacation to Florida. Maybe we should have gone to the Bahamas. But a person's in Shul on Yom Kippur, hopefully, they're not thinking, I should have stayed home and watched TV. Like, you're supposed to be there. This is where I am. This is where I'm supposed to be. I have this sort of absolute sense of existence and alignment. Like we have explained before, that it's not like it's a circle. Again, you can't give a physics description because this concept doesn't exist in the world of physics. Two things can't become one in the world of physics. But in the world of Kedusha, two things can become one. It's a little bit like we talked about yesterday, why the priestly garments were specifically made from wool and linen. We understand they could be, because Hashem is illustrating this point. In the world of Kedusha, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can incorporate them. Again, because they're not individuated. And it's not a concept that we can express, again, in the world of physics. Okay. This is what leads us to have the statement in the Gemara in Brachas, where it talks about the time of the Gan Eden, where there's no eating and drinking. But what do? The righteous sit with the crowns on their head, and they take delight in the divine radiance. Okay, they just take the light in the radiance, but it's still something separate from them. V'nenen atarahi. What does this mean when it uses the phrase "they sit with crowns"? What it means? It's like some kid's birthday party where they sit with a crown on their head. What does this mean? It is a crown like the cap of the top of a pillar. It's something that is above them. They are subsumed in something greater. The purpose of the king wearing the crown is not just to keep his head warm. It's so that he remembers that he serves something that sits above his intellect, above his individuality. He is subsumed within it. He is the servant to the history of his country, of his family, of his purpose and mission, and so on. V'hu b'chinas mamutza ha'machaber ha'oros ha'matzil ein sof baruch hu la'netzolim. U'la'osid yeyev yiskal b'olam hazeh l'chol tzadikim shekumu b'tchiyah b'amechulim tzadikim. That in the future time, in Mashiach's time, everybody, because everybody is ultimately referred to as a tzaddik, again, even if we're not tzaddik in behavior, but we will have this level where we will experience here in this physical world. I mean, an analogy that's sometimes used is in an army, the average soldier who's standing out there on Hill 375 and he's told, don't let any enemy pass, he might think, what am I doing here? What is the purpose of this? It seems meaningless. He has no sense of the battle. Now imagine in the time of King David, right? Not just some king who's a dictator, you know, some fat guy with a mutton, but somebody who is beloved by the people and who loves the people. And the soldier would long to be able to be in alignment with the king. He doesn't understand what he's doing. He's standing there and he just knows he has to stand here. But if he will one day come to understand that by standing there, he is protecting, he is protecting the entire country. And he is like a pawn in a chess game. That is, his mission is to protect the king.
Bless you.
Excuse me. Excuse me. His mission is, his whole objective in life is to protect the king. And that he will one day see how his seemingly insignificant act of standing there and making sure the enemy doesn't pass this hill in the middle of some forest, how this completely sustains the community and the king. This will give him the greatest pleasure, more than getting gold coins and so on. And again, it's a hard thing. I mean, we think of it, you know, because we're blessed to have the idea of a Rebbe and so on, and to have that sense that we're doing something of that mission. But again, unfortunately, in our society, there aren't too many people we revere. Okay. This is what we're taught when we say, Asidim tzadikim she'im l'fneim HaKodesh, that ultimately they will be able to say that Hashem is Kodesh when who bechinas muvdal she'ena begeder hasagas v'das. That is something outside, Kodesh meaning separated, something outside of anything I can experience. So a gold coin is wonderful, but it's limited. The sense of alignment with the infinity of Hashem. That is the truest, most impactful sense of it, that we can be absolutely aligned with the oneness of Hashem. She'ena begeder hasagas v'das. It's not something that you can explain. And again, this is why I'm struggling to try to explain it, because it doesn't really lend itself to some sort of literary illustration. It's way beyond chachma, again, some sort of intellectual academic das explanation that's in Gan Eden. So the pasuk reads that chachma comes from nothingness. Now, that pasuk is commonly read as Chachma mi'ayin tim. So Chachma, where does it come from? But Chassidus reads it as, and we've had this before, about 101, if you recall, the Alter Rebbe talks about this, that how does a person achieve this infinity of Hashem is by going outside the routine. But we read it instead of Chachma, from where does it come? We read it as Chachma comes from being at the level of total ayin, total bittul. So if we're at the level of total bittul, we can become connected to this level of infinity of Hashem. And that is only achievable through souls and bodies. Because souls in heaven, there's souls and God. I'm benefiting from God, but there's still that detachment. Keser Elyon. This is that loftiest level called Keser Elyon, the highest level of the crown. And again, the idea of something outside of myself. And one of the things that's very scary about that is I'm afraid I'm going to lose myself. Again, the Parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu's name isn't mentioned. It feels like, well, if they don't mention my name, I'm going to get lost. If I don't get called on, I'm going to get lost. If I don't assert myself, if I don't make my imprint, I'm going to get lost. And here, this is our ultimate goal. And this is why the animal soul goes, no, don't go there. You're going to lose your identity. You're going to lose your individuality. Remember, the Tower of Babel was driven by people saying, let us make a name for ourselves. And our mission is Kiddush Hashem, to make a name for God. And if I want my name, we get in the way. You know, it's like giving bad advice doesn't mean I deliberately tell the person to do something bad. It means if I a little bit have my own interest in heart, then I'm already distorting that kind of infinity. Now, when can you have such an experience? What's the only way to have this experience? Answer: neshamas and bodies. Because then we can do mitzvahs. We don't experience that because, not us, but other people we know, our bodies are a little bit, they want promise. I'm hungry, I'm tired, feed me, give me, I want. So the body gets in the way. But imagine when it'll be the time of Tchiyas HaMesim, that the body will be in total harmony with the soul. It won't be in this competitive thing about, I want what I want. It'll see itself in this total sense of harmony with the body. Then the body and the soul will experience godliness in a way far greater than the soul could experience without the body, and certainly the body without the soul. There's a discussion in the Gemara about which came first. Did the heavens come first or did the world come first? So we go, what do you mean? It's the first pasuk in the whole Torah that says, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Hello? So he said, yeah, but there's another pasuk that says that the world and the earth and the heavens he created. So the earth came first. So again, it's not about which pasuk says which, meaning what is the driving concept? What is the goal? Is the goal heaven and earth is just a way to get to heaven? Or is the goal earth and heaven is where the soul has to go until the earth is ready for it? And again, this becomes that dispute. The dispute, and again, the two different ways of thinking. What is the ultimate goal? We mentioned before, this goes back to Rambam and Ramban, 1,000 years ago. Rambam says the ultimate joy, the ultimate reward, the ultimate consequence, the ultimate end of the game is souls without bodies. And Ramban says the ultimate end of the game is bodies and souls in perfect harmony. And that's the point that Chassidus is taking, as we've mentioned. So what then is the value of Gan Eden? Because you got to have, it's like, why did we send our kids to yeshiva? So that when they're 35, somehow they turn out to be mentioned. You don't always see it right away, right? It's not like you always get instantaneous results. But when we do the godly thing and we saturate and marinate in Kedusha, what do you know? It works out a little better down the pike. Look at that. That's a miracle. And that's why the souls have to go to that level. It doesn't mention it here, but just worth mentioning, there is a question. Mashiach is going to come today. Amen. So will we experience Tchiyas HaMesim? So one position, obviously, is, well, no, we don't need Tchiyas HaMesim. We're already alive. And the other is, no, we will, because there is a certain quality where the soul has to pass through Gan Eden and come back down here, like a refresh, like a restart. So again, whatever the nuances are going to be, let's double dare Hashem to prove it to us, and then we'll see. But the concept is that there is always going to be a value to that detached moment. Like I talk about Yom Kippur, Shabbos, davening. We all have to have those moments where we're not engaged in the physical. We often mention that the person says to Hashem, this is really hard. Every day, make the world a godly place. Make the world a godly place, Can we get a break? So Hashem says, yes, you're right. I'll give you a break. I'll give you Yom Kippur. You don't have to make the world a godly place. You don't have to deal with the world. You can be totally self-absorbed. On Yom Kippur, you can just be completely engaged in yourself. You don't have to think about other people. You don't have to think about anything. You just pull your towels over your head and daven all day. You get one day that you get a break. The rest of the life, it's make the world a godly place. So this is this level that there is a value in everybody experiencing. We're not against Gan Eden, but again, Gan Eden is just a warm-up to get us into this physical world. As it says, that the dew will resuscitate us, the souls will return into this physical world, but there is a value in them going through this process of Gan Eden. The Zehu, and now we return to that pasuk. The pasuk in Tehillim reads, "Of all finite things I have seen the end, your commandments are very broad." And we pointed out that the word there seems to say your commandments specific, not mitzvah secha with the yud, which would suggest your commandments. So now we understand. Now we can understand why David HaMelech writes that your specific mitzvah is very broad. Which mitzvah is that? He mitzvahs atzedakah. Shukli v'shetech rochav ma'oid l'slabish b'ha'aretz ha'oretz baruch hu k'mashkasul v'usha tzedakah. That which mitzvah is the most impactful as far as this infinity of Hashem? That is the mitzvah of tzedakah. It is the most capacious vessel of the infinite light of Hashem, and therefore it is referred to as the garment of Hashem. Asher yoyid la'aseh bebechinis bligvul betachlis bechesed chinam besrusa delasata. Zoi hanikra derech Hashem. That it will ultimately express itself in the infinity of Hashem, that He will respond as generously, that gratuitous kindness that we talked about, and that is called the path of Hashem. You recall that before Hashem tells Abraham about Hashem's plan to destroy the people of Sodom, Hashem says to us, the readers of Torah, like a narrator, He says, "Can I conceal from Abraham what I intend to do? For I know that he will instruct his children in the ways of Hashem." And what are the ways of Hashem? To do tzedakah. That's the next line, to do tzedakah. And again, it's Abraham welcoming in the guests that prompts Hashem to say, "Oh, I owe Abraham something. I owe him the information that I'm going to destroy Sodom." And yes, of course, Hashem is hopeful that Abraham will elicit a bit of an argument so that we will see the justice in what Hashem does, etc., etc. At the most basic level, what is it that prompts Hashem? Hashem tells us. Why does Hashem, it's going to sound like almost a silly thing, why does Hashem feel obligated, like he has to say something to Abraham? Because Abraham does tzedakah. Not because he puts on tefillin, not because he learns Torah, because Abraham does tzedakah. That's what prompts Hashem to do it. That's the pasuk that we referenced last week. And that's the way of Hashem. Again, the narrator, God, says to us in Torah, "Can I conceal from Abraham what I intend to do? For I know that he will teach his children the way of Hashem." What is the way of Hashem? Next two words, to do tzedakah. That's right there. 1819 or 1918, I always forget, in Genesis. That's why this pasuk in Tehillim says it is very broad. What do you mean it's very broad? It's very broad, that it means it's without end. Not just broader than broad, it means without end. But every other objective, I mean, that's the beginning of that pasuk that says of every finite being I have seen the end. That's the beginning of that pasuk in Tehillim 1:1996. Tichlu miloshin kalois hanefesh. And here the word tichla means even that which brings out the expiry of the soul, which we hold to be this great sense of longing. Which again, even in Gan Eden, there is a limit. And there's still the soul and Hashem. There's still going to be a separation. That's what we told all the different levels of Gan Eden, higher and higher. But that means at every level, it's still limited. If there's a higher and a lower, it means it's limited, it's still measurable. Even 100 million, billion, zillion is limited. Ad Reim HaMailas to the highest level. This is again the description that we say that the scholars have no rest in the world to come. They're constantly going higher and higher. Wonderful. But again, that means that it's limited. You know, I use this again, and maybe an analogy. The guy gets to the kotel for the very first time and he wants to daven. So he says, "Which way is east?" There's no east. You're here. This is it. This isn't like, well, which way is east? This is it. It's not east. It's about facing Yerushalayim. It's not Yerushalayim, it's about facing the Beis Hamikdash. If you're in Australia, it's west. And if you're in the north of Israel, it's south. But we become so consumed with east that we forgot that this is it. And that's what we're saying. Mitzvahs, this is it. Until the coming of Mashiach with Tchiyas HaMesim, then there'll be this sense of calm, not laziness, not lay on the hammock calm, but the sense that there's no longer striving, that this is it, you're done, you made it, you've arrived. You are standing here at the Koisel, you are at the spot. It's not about east, and it's not about, you have arrived there. And this, again, it's speaking specifically about tzedakah, as we mentioned. The core message is this philosophy that Hasidus, and again, everyone here is familiar with from so many other teachings, that it's about the mitzvah observance, and that is the greatest illustration of this level of, or not just illustration, that's the wrong way of saying it. It is the union. That is where we become absolutely one with Hashem. And again, it's difficult to explain because this doesn't exist in the physical world. Hewlett and Packard make one company, but there's still two individuals. And when we do mitzvahs, it's not me and Hashem. It's simply the oneness of Hashem. The end.